Okay, as I said, my name's David Engwich. I'm from Brisbane in Australia. I got my start in this business a bit over 25 years ago. I was washing windows for a living at the time, and the Highway Department decided to put a major road development through our suburb. I got involved in the community fight against that, so I come from a kind of a community activist background. I didn't have the foggiest idea about urban design or what made cities work, etc. Can everybody hear me okay? Yep. Within about 3 years I was travelling around the world as some kind of international guru on transport, urban design, etc. So you've got to be really careful when you come to an event like this. You just don't know where you're going to end up, all right? And I'm serious. There are going to be some people here today that this is going to be set you off in a new direction that you didn't have the foggiest idea, and I expect that there'll be at least one or two international experts that will come out of today. You ready? Yeah. All right. Cut a long story short, I ended up being the placemaker for a small town in Victoria in Australia, which is where I really learnt about dealing with this town was called Struggle Town, so I know what it's like to work in an area where it's Struggle Town. And my job was to revitalise the main street. So a lot of the principles I'm going to be talking to you about today were born out of that experience, and since then I've been working with quite a number of towns in New Zealand. I'm going to tell a story a little later on about what's been happening in Porirua, and that will illustrate the kind of process that we're going to be working with you today. Okay. Now, first of all, I want to set the scene as to the kind of process that this workshop falls within, so that you understand where we're going. We started on this project back in, I think it was late January, early February. And the first thing that we do is do what we call a placemaking framework and create a base, and then select a project area and then create a base plan for that. I'm going to take you through that a little later on, but there's been some serious preparation work that has been done in the lead up to this particular workshop. Where we are here is at stage 3, which is the workshop. And out of today, at the end of today, the goal is not so much to have a plan as it is to have a number of people who are so fired up that you are going to form a working group to actually implement the general direction of what comes out of today. Okay, so we're not going to cross all of the T's and dot all of the I's today, but we need to have a working group of people who are going to supervise the implementation. That leads on to this stage here, which we call the work plan. So that group will develop a budget, a plan for what's going to happen. We like to see that happen probably about 6 weeks after this workshop, so we're talking pretty tight time frames here. That gets signed off by the council and by creative communities. We want to make sure that what you're about to do is actually going to work. So both the council and us will sign off on that work plan, and then hopefully at the end of today we'll have some idea of when this is. We have a makeover, which is a community affair, and they usually go for a weekend, so it's a very short time frame. We're going to be making over the space, and then we review and adjust that and then choose the next project. Now, this is a very, very different approach to what you've been used to or what you may have experienced in other workshops. We are not here to establish a wish list. What we are looking for is, where do we start? What's the smallest thing that we can do that is going to start to make a difference? And I'll explain all of that in a moment, but I want you to start to see that you're not here to do what normally happens in these kind of workshops, which is to create ideas and plans that are never ever going to happen. The idea today is that we're going to come up with something that we're actually going to implement in about 12 weeks' time, and there's going to be something on the ground as a result of that. We don't care how small it is, we're starting somewhere. All right? Okay. So that leads me to some rules about the way today needs to operate. And this will give you, again, a bit of a flavour as to what we're going to be doing. The first is that we're here to build a great public place. And we know that has to start somewhere. Okay, so we're not saying we're going to build the entire great public space, and when I show you the pie here story, you'll see exactly what I mean. And so today is not a day for complaining about, well, we've done this planning 10 times before and nothing's happened. We've only got one retailer here. We're accepting what we've got, where we are at the moment. That's where we're starting from. We're not going backwards. We're not going to analyse the past. We're going to create a positive thing that we can do together today. And so we're not going to spend any time on that kind of retrospective, what's gone wrong in the past, etc. Number two, we're going to do it with the resources we have, not with what we wish we had. Now, this is a huge thing. Part of our process this morning, and I'll outline the process in a moment, is that we create a resources bank right up front. And all of the ideas that we generate have to be within the confines of that resource bank. Because otherwise we're creating ideas we can't implement. Okay? And this actually forces us to be really, really creative, because we have to deal with the resources we've got, not with what we wish we had. Thirdly, we're going to start small but extremely creatively. We like to think of these projects like planting a seed in the soil and a tree grows out of that seed. And what's really absolutely key here is that the seed must have the DNA of the future inherent within the seed. That is, that whatever we choose today is not a means to an end, but it is the ends in seed form. In other words, we want to create something from which the future can grow, and the kind of future we really desire. What we often do in these kind of processes is we come up with, well, first of all, we have to do this, this, and this, and it has absolutely no connection to the kind of space that we want to create in the longer term. So this is a bit like, if you just imagine you've just bought a bit of a rundown house, you've got to start renovating somewhere. And you don't start in every corner of the house. You start in one spot, you pick the most strategic spot, and you start there with the resources you've got. But it might take you a few years to do it because you don't have the money to renovate the entire space. So that's the kind of philosophy that we will be dealing with. And lastly, we'll take responsibility for delivery. And a little phrase that we use is, no drivers, no project. If nobody volunteers to do a single thing today, then nothing will happen. Now, there'll be a million great ideas that will come out. You'll mould them in plasticine, you'll make them out of paddle pop sticks, you'll do all sorts of wonderful things. But if somebody doesn't stand up at the end of today and say, I'm going to make X happen, then that X is not going to happen. Okay? So this is where you as a group have to take responsibility. This is not, we're going to send a plan off to some other group to implement for us. This is something that we have to implement ourselves. We have to take responsibility for. Okay, any questions about the rules? Good. You all happy with the rules? All right. Well, we're off to a good start. Okay, so the way the day is going to run, the agenda for the day, and I haven't put times on this because we might get a fire alarm or we might get a noisy thing happening, so we have to mould the day. We have to be a little bit flexible with the way the day runs. I'm going to give you a presentation on placemaking so that you understand the general principles of how you go about creating a great place. We're going to talk about the framework and the base plan, and we're going to make sure that we're all in agreement with that. So what we've discovered over time is that some pre-work has to be done in these kind of circumstances to analyse why a space isn't working, what needs to happen for it to work. That's what we'll be presenting to you. That's the base plan. And from there we can start to build. We're going to create a resources bank, as I mentioned, so that will include whatever resources the council's putting into it and any other bodies. And you can start thinking about this now. We even ask you to tell us what junk you've got in your garage that you'd be willing to donate. Okay, so that's part of the resources. So a wide range of resources that will go into the resources bank. We'll then put you into small groups and you will start to generate ideas of what would be the best way to use, the most creative way to use those resources. Now what we often find here is that a bit of junk that somebody is willing to donate can be the trigger for a fantastic idea, and something will grow out of that. So each group will work on that. We will then do a process which we'll see how we're going for time. There's a number of ways we can do this, but basically each group will have other people commenting on their plan in order to refine it, improve the ideas, etc. And then the end of the day is the second last thing of the day is that we will identify drivers and supporters. So people will stand up and say, I want to be the driver for X. And there'll be other people that say, well, I can't put that much energy in, but I would like to support that person. So we'll have little action groups of drivers and supporters for various aspects of the project. And then we'll have an action plan where we'll set some notional dates as to when we do the makeover, etc., how those groups are going to meet, etc. So that's the way that the day will run. Any questions about that? Oh, you're a very compliant group. We'll see for how long, eh? Okay, so I'm going to do a presentation for you now on the nature of placemaking. We define placemaking as being like homemaking, just like you turn a house into a home. Placemakers turn spaces into places. Now, if I ask you to think about somebody's house or home where the moment you walk through the back door you instantly feel at home, what is it about that space that makes you feel at home?
It's personal to them.
It's personalised, so they have photographs, knickknacks, yep, etc. Now, I'm going to expand on each of these as we go through. The reason that is so important is, and the reason it makes us feel at home, is that when we look at the photographs, the wedding photographs or the knickknacks from Bali that they brought back or whatever, it tells the story of those people. Even the books that are on the coffee table tell the story, something about those people. And our own story resonates with that story. So if we see the wedding photographs, it reminds us of our own wedding and we either shudder or rejoice. You with me? And so we feel connected to the story. Okay, at the back?
Volume space.
Volume of space?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Size.
Okay, so it needs to be have a sense of intimacy to it, but also a sense of spaciousness. So there's an interesting contradiction there. Okay, yeah?
Feel safe and inviting.
Has to feel safe and inviting. Yeah. Let's talk about inviting. What makes it feel inviting?
The colours, the warmth, the size, and the smell.
All right. Let's deal with the smells.
Light.
Yeah. Just hang on 1 minute. Our experiences of home are entirely sensual. Now, us men have a hard job with this concept. The women will understand what I mean. Our experiences of home are mediated via our senses, to put it in a more kind of male way. It's all about the smells of cooking, the light, etc. And yet when we plan public spaces, we usually think of them in very utilitarian terms, not in sense terms. So one of the things we're going to have to do today is to get out of that old, we just got to put a seat, into what is the kind of experience, what's the sense experience that we're going to be facilitating for these people. Okay, somebody else. There's somebody over here.
Yeah, I was that's sort of collecting with what everybody said, but it's the environment and how you respond and how you relate to it.
Okay, so let's talk about this. Can we call that the vibe?
Yeah, like the experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what is it that creates the vibe?
Colour.
Yeah?
People. Sound.
Okay. Now, we've gone a long way in this discussion before we get somebody that actually says people. Now, there's somebody in the home that plays an incredibly important role, and without them, we don't have the vibe. So what's the role that person plays?
Host.
The host. So when we're looking at a place like the Canopies, we really need to be thinking about who are the people who play the role of host in this space, because without it, it's just an empty space. Okay? One of the things, we'll keep going, I'll come back to this in a minute. What's some other things that make you feel at home?
Activity, memory of activity that we have done in the place. So just remember what we have done in this place. So it makes us attached to that place.
Yep. Okay, so there's some memories, or we can also call this an emotional attachment to the place. So you remember all of the great conversations, all of the great meals that you had in that place. One of the things we're going to discover is that placemaking is all about creating memories or experiences for people, and that then establishes an emotional attachment. Okay, I know you'll have lots of other suggestions, but what I want you to get out of this little part of the discussion is this, that not a single one of you have said that what makes you feel at home is that the person employed a really expensive interior designer. Now, I'm not saying design's not important. I want you to get this very clear, that design is important in the process, but what we are doing for people is making them feel at home, and design is the carriage at the back of the train. It is never the engine driving the train. Okay, so we're going to be concerned about design, but what we're going to be aiming at is that we want to create this kind of place where people feel welcome. So let me unpack this for you a little bit. This is my granddaughter Nikita. When she was 2 years old, she badly cut a finger. And every time her mother changed the bandage on her finger, she would cry and say, "Mummy, I want to go home." And her mother would patiently explain to her that she was already at home. She's standing in the lounge room, at which Nikita would get really, really upset, stamp her feet and say, "No, I want to go home." Some of you are nodding. My daughter came to me and said, "Dad, what is happening? Why can't she understand that she's at home?" And I said to her, home is a feeling, not a location. So what we're trying to create for people in the Canopies area is not a location, it's a feeling. Okay, and that's what we need to focus on, is what is the feeling that we're going to create. And that feeling is this. I believe everybody has an ache in the back of their head for a sense of home, to feel at home. And what that means is a space in which there is no pain, in which you are totally nurtured, where there is total support.
Would you say there's interaction between you and where you are?
Oh, absolutely there's a relationship. and some of you might think I'm getting a bit woo-woo when I say this, but placemaking or homemaking is actually connected to the first 9 months of our existence, where we were surrounded by a sea, a protective sea, totally nurtured, totally protected. And that's the place in our psyche which is home. And that's the place that people want to be able to go back to. So absolutely your environment is like that enwrapping sea of water. So it's a totally nurturing, totally protected kind of a space. Okay, I'm going to explain this with one other story. And I weighed up whether I'd include this because I knew we'd be tight for time, but I think it explains the concept. This is a suitcase that I built many years ago. Did anybody walk in and say, I think this guy's mildly eccentric? Thank you.
We all.
I'm going to absolutely prove it for you, that maybe it is a bit more than mildly. Because out of this suitcase folds this. And just for fun, I travelled around the world and set my suitcase up in famous locations. So this is Thomas Bridge in Prague, Zurich, Paris. Now, something strange happens when you put a throne in the middle of the Champs-Élysées. People want to come and sit in the chair and have their photograph taken. And in Paris, I got the last train home, there were so many people wanting to sit in the chair and have their photograph taken. Now you'll notice that I have some royal robes, a crown and a sceptre as well. And it always surprised me that these characters also asked to get dressed up. I never ever approached anybody, this was all just spontaneous. Now, I wanted to set my throne up in this deserted car park in Los Angeles. My dad was an itinerant gospel preacher, so this had a little bit of resonance for me. Now, there was acres and acres of bitumen in this place, just in a totally empty, abandoned car park. And I put the suitcase down when I saw a police car drive across the car park towards me, and I knew they were coming for me because there was nobody else for miles around. And he pulled up beside me and said, "What are you doing here?" And I explained to him that inside the gold suitcase was a giant throne. I was going to take the throne out, take some photographs of myself. And he said, "Well, you can't do it here." Looked around at all the weeds growing in the bitumen. I went, "Well, why not?" And he said, "Because this is where all the homeless people in downtown Los Angeles sleep of a night, and as soon as it gets dark, you're not going to be safe, and that expensive camera gear sure as hell ain't going to be safe. You need to pack up for your own safety and move on immediately." Now, obviously I didn't. And when it got dark, sure enough, the homeless people came out of the woodwork. And what did they want to do? They wanted to sit in the throne and have their photograph taken. None of them were interested in stealing my camera gear. Now, I'd shown this particular picture dozens of times in presentations when one day it occurred to me that this was the perfect snapshot of what placemaking is all about. You see, when this woman sits in the chair and she takes the sceptre and puts the crown on her own hat, she's got all of her worldly goods parked in her lap. When she sits in the chair, what happens to her?
She feels special. Of some description.
She feels like the Queen. She's transformed from a homeless person into the Queen of Los Angeles. And at that precise moment, a crack appears in the wall of her reality. And through that crack, she spies potential for herself that she never dreamed possible. Now we come back to the comment the lady made at the back. Is my chair still in the Los Angeles car park?
No.
In her imagination, it is still there. And every time she remembers the night this crazy Australian dude arrived with the suitcase and she got to be the Queen of Los Angeles, every time that memory resurfaces, the same crack appears in the wall of her reality. What she spied that night as potential for herself is like a beacon on the horizon calling her forth to a higher mode of being. And this is what placemaking is all about. It is about creating these experiences for people that are potentially transformative, that call them forth to a higher mode of being. And we need to remember that today we are not just trying to create a nice place that sells lots of goods. What we're trying to do is create a space that creates memories for people which are potentially transformative. Now, one of the interesting things about, and this shows why placemaking in our society is so important. This illustrates another very important principle. Our culture, and maybe not so much Maori culture, but certainly white European culture, is incredibly mobility-centric or movement-centric. I won't get too philosophical with you, but it came out of the Industrial Revolution where we started to see our urban environments in very machine terms. We began to see ourselves in very machine terms. But one of the things we observe whenever we do an analysis of public space is that that public space is always movement focused. It is all about moving people through the space. Now there's a great tragedy in a society that is tied up, that is totally movement focused. And that is that our potential always lies at some future destination. We are always moving to our potential. If I went around this room today, almost every person in this room would have a story, an internal story that says, when I get my degree, I will finally fly. When I get the new job, I will finally fly. When I find the perfect partner, I will finally fly. When I get rid of the person I thought was the perfect partner, I will fly. And where do our councils put all of their energy? Where do we spend all of our money? On making plans for the future. 30-year plans. Our potential always lies off in the future. Now what placemaking does is that when this woman sits in the chair, she suddenly loses her focus on where am I going to sleep tonight, where is my next meal coming from. The focus is no longer on the future. She is grounded in the present moment in which there are infinite possibilities. If I could take your focus off of your plans for the future, and as I said earlier, somebody's going to walk out of this meeting today having discovered something, a passion that they never dreamed that they would have. There's infinite possibilities right here, right now, at this present moment. And so this is why creating places in which people can connect with their surrounds in the present moment is such an important thing. It's also what the focus of the whole of today is about, is what is the potential residing right here, right now, that we can tap into, that we can then take forward. Okay, now on your tables is a little set of 10 cards, and so if you'd like to pick up one of those, we're going to start getting tactile, folks.
I think there's one each. Yeah, there you go.
Now these are a set of cards that once we've trained people, they allow you to do an audit of a place like the Canopies and then start to generate some ideas. And so today you can refer to these, and I'm just going to run through them very, very quickly to explain the concepts of placemaking. So if we go to number 1, reclaim your place. One of the things that, or a major discovery I made in 1996, which changed the whole direction of my career, was this: that the speed of traffic on people's residential streets is governed to a large extent by the degree to which those residents have psychologically retreated from their street. Now, this is how it happened historically. When kids used to play in the middle of the street, just bear with me, I'm going to connect this to the canopies, so it's okay. I'm just explaining the concept. When kids used to play in the middle of the street and they'd call a car when a car came along, the cars went slow because just around the corner there might be some kids playing in the street. The first parent who said to their child, don't play in the middle of the road, play on the footpath, did not have the foggiest idea that what they were doing was giving permission to every driver to drive faster on their street. And when the cars went faster, the parent said, what? Don't play on the footpath, play in the front yard. Traffic went faster. Now, we've documented that this retreat keeps going on to where the person doesn't garden in the front gardens anymore, doesn't sit on their front steps anymore, doesn't park their car in the street. Every step of the retreat is an invitation for the traffic to go faster. And then those residents are banging on City Hall's door saying, please put speed bumps in our street. Are you with me? And it's all to do with the psychological retreat. Now, what we've discovered is that if you can get the residents to actually psychologically reclaim their street and start doing things in the street again, the speed of the traffic goes way down. Now, exactly the same thing happens in shopping centres. When times get tough, the retailers psychologically withdraw into their shop and move further and further back in their shop. And they abandon the footpath in front of their shop. One of the huge tasks that we've got is a psychological task. Now, it's not just the retailers. The same thing happens for the general population. I often go to a place, and we will hear it today, that there are certain groups of people who have colonised the canopies. And people will say to me, David, what are you going to do about those people? And my response is always, it is not the people that are there that is the problem, it is the people who are missing that is the problem. If that space was flooded with people like you, instead of being at this workshop, no, sorry, it's all right. And you didn't scurry through the space because you were frightened of these people. Are you with me? And I'll come back to that in a moment, but the trick here is that we have to psychologically reclaim the canopies as part of the civic space of the city, and that's a psychological task. And today's the start of that, okay? And it's really important, the processes that we're going to talk to you about as the day goes on, the penny will drop, that a large part of what we're doing here is getting you to take control psychologically of that space. Okay, card number 2, homemaking. I've already explained that, but one of the ways of looking at the canopies is to say, what do we need to do to make people feel at home in this space? And just look at it through the eyes of a homemaker. If this was your home, what would you do to make it, to create the kind of vibe that we're talking about earlier? Number 3, memorable experiences. So we've talked about that to some extent, that what we're here to do is to create memorable experiences, and the greatness of any place is measured by how memorable those experiences are. So everything that we do is an opportunity to create a memory for people. So instead of just putting a seat in, let's put something in that creates a memory. If it's just a normal park bench, there's no memory associated with that. Are you with me? So for example, I'll show you an example a bit later on, that every utilitarian need that people have, whether it's toilets, baby change, drinking water, etc., are a chance to create a great experience for people. You don't have to meet that need just through the standard utilitarian way. Okay? I'm a great fan of using toilets as a key for revitalising public spaces, because it's not what people expect. to go into a place, into a toilet that creates a great memory for them. All right, you with me? You will be by the end of today, it's all right. Number 4, rooms, not corridors. Now this is what I mentioned earlier, that most public spaces are built like a corridor in a house. Has anybody here ever been to an architect or a real estate agent and said, please find me a house with maximum number of corridors? I just love corridors. Okay? And yet our public spaces are largely built as corridors, even the pedestrian spaces. So if you look at the canopies area, it's all centred around moving people through. Okay? And so what we need to do, and I'll show you this when we show you our base plan for the canopies area, we need to create this sense of room. And in fact, the volume of the canopies at the moment is working against that. And so one of the things we have to deal with is how do we, as the gentleman at the back, start to carve out intimate spaces within that space so that they feel more like rooms or a series of rooms than a corridor. And there's some ideas there you can look at as you go through the day. Number 5, linger nodes. Now this is a really, really, really fundamental point in placemaking. What's the number 1 attractor to any public space?
It's usually a feature, some sort of feature.
Yeah? People.
Coffee.
Now all of those things, the feature, the coffee, etc., if there are no people in the space, you don't go to the coffee shop with nobody in it, you go to the coffee shop with somebody in it. Okay, now if people are the number 1 attractor to a public space, so all of you have been, I am sure, as a tourist, gone to some famous place and got there and gone, what the hell is really here? It's the vibe, it's the people, it's not the setting. Right? The setting can be rather ordinary, but it's what's the vibe there? Okay. Now what if I could tell you that using just the existing people in that visit the canopies, so without attracting 1 extra visitor to the canopies, we could have 7 times more people in the canopies. We could make it 7 times more vibrant than what it currently is. Only using the people who currently visit there. How would we do it?
Make them stay longer.
Make them stay longer. If they stay 7 times longer, it will be 7 times full of people. Now, if you get nothing out of today other than this, this is the major secret of placemaking. It's based, it's collaborated by a guy in Australia called Peter Andrews, who has revolutionised the way degraded farmland is dealt with. And what Peter Andrews does is, the first thing he does is he slows the flow of water through the property. He puts rocks in the stream, he plants reeds in the stream, he creates contour banks, and he says, if I can make the water stay 7 times longer on a property, it does 7 times the work hydrating the soil. Now this is the same principle here. If we can get people to stay 7 times longer or twice as long, they do twice the work of bringing the canopies to life, without us having done a single thing to the canopies. Now, the issue here, though, is that we have to create the equivalent of the rocks in the stream and the logs in the stream or in the contour banks, and we call these linger nodes. In other words, there has to be something that slows the people flow. So a simple example is, if tomorrow we put a painted piano in there and people start playing the piano, people will stop to listen to the music. That's a linger node. These linger nodes can be really simple. In one place they have a lot of low brick walls. I look at everything and say, how can I turn that into a linger node? I said to the group, what do we do to turn this into a linger node? Nobody had any idea. So I said, let's glue foreign coins along the top of the wall. We'll have a retailer handing out sheets of paper and pencils, and kids can do pencil rub-ins of the coins on the top of the wall. $20 for a linger node. Are you with me? Yep. This is not rocket science. This is putting stuff out there that attracts the kind of customers that you want. I haven't included the pictures in this show, but when I was in Wodonga, one of the major projects that I did was there was a long blank supermarket wall which everybody complained the only people that hung out there were the ferals. You know what, does that make, you know what a feral is? Yeah, okay. And I won't tell you the full story about this wall, but it's a fascinating example of how the way we build spaces actually attracts a certain clientele. And so I turned that blank wall into an outdoor art gallery with 10 big display windows in it. And 2 weeks later the retailers came to me and said all of the ferals have disappeared. And I said, no, they haven't. Because previously people like you would scurry past the wall with the ferals hanging out. Now they're spending 15, 20, 30 minutes looking at the displays in the windows. You understand what we've done? We've got the people we want in the space to stay longer. Whatever the people who are going to balance the space, the people who are missing, are scurrying through the space, you don't notice them. You've got to create linger nodes that will slow those people down. Okay, that's linger nodes. Playfulness. Any great public space has a sense of playfulness about it. It's not over-rationalised, it's not overly serious. So we need to bring some playful elements into the space, and I could talk for a long time about the importance of that. Number 7 is meta stories. Meta stories are the stories that communities tell. So in Wodonga I mentioned that they call themselves Struggle Town. That term, that story about their town, put a glass ceiling on what was possible for that town. And what you've got to be very, very careful about is what are the town stories you are telling about the canopies. Because those stories will be putting a glass ceiling on what is possible for the canopies. It will limit what you can possibly do. So one of the things we have to do today is really challenge the dominant stories about the canopies. And what we're going to be doing is creating a new story, a more empowering story for the canopies, and then we're going to say, what do we actually have to put in place to bring that story, that new story about? Whatever you accept the old story, you'll be paralysed by that. Does that make sense to you? I'll explain it quickly in another way. When a poor person wins the lottery, what happens to their money? It's gone in 2 years on average. One of the reasons is that when a poor person who wins the lottery gets up in the morning after they've won the lottery and they look in the mirror, do they see a multi-millionaire looking back at them, or do they see a poor person with 10 million bucks that they don't deserve in their pocket? So what they see in the mirror is their meta story. And so that's what we're saying here, that if you have a story in your head that the canopies are a certain way, they've always been a certain way, they will be a certain way, then they will be a certain way. We'll never be able to break out of that. So we've got to consciously break that mindset and challenge it every time in the discussions today. Every time you hear somebody saying the standard old story, you need to challenge that and say, yes, well, that's the story we've always told, but today we're starting a new story. Okay? Number 8, embrace contradictions. The most interesting people at a party are the people who have not got their shit together. People who have ironed out all of their internal contradictions are really boring people. Monodimensional. I said today's it's a personal growth seminar, in case you didn't realise that. It's got nothing to do with the canopies at all. Here's something that'll liberate a few people. Let's do an experiment. I want all of those people in the room who are absolutely proud of the fact that you are a huge bundle of internal contradictions to jump up. Stand up. Yeah, stand up if you're proud of it. All right. Oh, now then, yeah, right. Okay. Now, for the rest of you sitting down, look at these people.
Obviously.
These are the only healthy people in the room. All right, you can sit down. Now, this is a liberating point, as I said. It is a normal part of being human to have internal contradictions. I'll give you one quick example. When you get up in the morning and you've got your toast on and you're reading the newspaper, you're in your resident frame of mind, what's your attitude to the cars outside of your house driving past? Do you want them to go faster or slower? You want them to go slower. You following here?
Yeah.
10 minutes later, when you go out and get in the car, put the keys in, you're with me, right? And you slip into your motoring persona, do you want the cars to go slower or faster? Are you with me? What you want at any one point of time is dependent on what mode of being, what persona you happen to be in. And look, for the counsellors and the council staff here, let me say that for too long we've been running community consultation as if the community has only one opinion about things. Depends what hat they're wearing when they arrive at the workshop. If they come in their resident hat, they'll want the traffic to go slower. If they come with their motoring hat on, they'll want it to go faster. And we have such this simplistic notion of community values and community desires. Now, the same thing is true in the canopies. There will be a whole range of functions that need to happen, and the temptation is, let's get rid of all of the conflict. Let's get rid of all of the tension. In fact, the tension is what will make the space interesting. We have to find creative ways of embracing the full gamut of what needs to happen in that space. Okay. Number 9, deficits into assets. One of the principles that I work on is that your greatest deficits are potentially your greatest assets. And you simply have to find a way of turning the deficit into asset. I see far too many communities going, such and such a space is degraded or whatever, and they see it as a deficit. They don't see it as a potential asset. And so one of the tricks we're going to do today is how do we turn the canopies area and the deficits of the canopy area into assets. And I'll give you some examples of that in a moment. Number 10, plant a seed. And this goes back to what I mentioned earlier about what we're going to be looking for is an action that is the seed of the future. Now again, this is a bit of personal growth and a range of other stuff, but we as people and communities waste an awful lot of time on means to an end that doesn't have any DNA of the future inherent in that action. So a quick story to illustrate, just so you get this concept. There was a guy who came back from the war, a broken man, and ended up on the streets homeless for 4 years. And then he met a young lady, and he got his mind back, he got married, got a job, got a house, but he had a burning passion to do something for the homeless men that he'd slept rough with on the streets. So he set up a bank account called the Soup Kitchen account. His dream was to create a soup kitchen for homeless men. And he would work overtime, double time, put the money into this account. And one day he said to his wife, I'm working overtime tonight, and she said, Doug, I think it's time you gave up on that dream. Instead of working overtime tonight, why don't you go out and find one homeless man and bring him home for dinner? We've got one extra kitchen chair. See, working overtime and putting the money in the account was a means to the end that had no DNA of the future. The future was not going to grow out of that. Going out and finding one homeless man, bringing him home for dinner, using the one chair they had, did have the DNA of the future. It was possible that his soup kitchen could grow out of that. In fact, he spent the money extending the kitchen and buying a bigger kitchen table. You with me? So we must focus on what is our dream and how do we drag that dream into the present moment rather than constructing a whole series of means to that end. How can we do that in the micro kind of way? Okay, so that's a quick tour of placemaking. How are you all hanging in? Good. All right, now I'm going to give you an example of this in practice and what we are going to hope to achieve out of today, okay? I'll keep standing in your way, sir. I'm going to tell you the story of Paihia in the Bay of Islands here in New Zealand. Like many towns, they were suffered from the GFC. They're a tourist-orientated town. And like a lot of other towns, they spent a lot of time and energy creating a master plan for their town centre. Can you guys over there see all right? Because you could move closer, you know, if you want to. Oh, you might run out, all right. Now, as you can tell from this is probably, I should have mentioned, Paihia's a town of 1,700 people. This master plan for their town centre was probably $20–25 million. Don't laugh, you guys do it too.
That's why I laugh.
Now, they asked me to help them with their master plan, and my statement to them is, I don't make plans, I make places. Now, I want you to get the significant difference here. Today we're about making a place, we're not about making a plan. Now, Paihia was one of the first places that we ran the kind of process that we're running here today. That is, I said to them, unless you've got some money on the table, I really can't come and help you. I need something to work with. I don't care whether it's $100, $500, $5,000, whatever it happens to be, we've got to have something to work with. So they went to their council and they got a $5,000 grant. Now, we ran it in a similar way, except it was a 2-day process back in those days, included a walk around town, and we kind of, and this was the project that emerged out the other end of that as the project that people wanted to do first. Over here is the waterfront. Town centre is over here. There's a state highway in between, and in between this was this goddamn awful space that nobody ever used. All of the participants said they'd never seen anybody sitting in this space whatsoever. Now, what the process that we used there will be the same process here, is that we had a weekend sprint, 3 days, 100 volunteers turned up to help make over this space. And this gives you some idea of them all busily working away. And for $5,000, this is the space that they created. Now, incidentally, these seats here were old seats out of a ferry that somebody donated, and that was the core for the development of this whole idea. Now, this space is constantly alive with people. It changed the whole psyche of the town. I started getting emails saying we used to fight amongst ourselves all the time. Now we're really proud of what we've done. This space was just pumping with people constantly. Now, this is a group called Focus Paihia who ran this, and one of the board members of Focus Paihia said, when we ran the workshop, that idea was not the only idea that came up. There were 4 other key ideas that had drivers, but there was no money to do them, and this one was the first one chosen. And she said, let's raise our own money to do the other 3 projects. So she set up this op shop. Now, I want you to get the significance of this. This town started their project with a set of old rotten ferries in somebody's backyard, and now they're going to run their program by recycling their crap and turning it into money to create great public spaces. So this is the ultimate of turning your deficits into assets. This woman here, Kath, in a few months through the op shop raised in a town of 1,700 people. Now, I was so impressed, I said, I'm coming back, I'm going to run a workshop for free for you, I'll pay my own airfares. I need to reward this effort. And out of that came another 8 new projects. And this is just a snapshot of those 8 projects being implemented over the winter months. Each of these projects had a driver, and they were done over the winter months. So just get the spirit of this, kids working on it, people coming together. Now, one of the projects they wanted to do was this toilet block, but nobody had any idea what to do with it. And so they approached me and they said, David, we'd love to do something with our toilet block. It's the town embarrassment. In fact, some tourists had written on the wall, worst public toilet I've seen thus far in New Zealand. Now, I got down to this toilet block and I was going to say wet my pants, but that's not it. I got really, really excited. The worse something is, the more excited I get. Because it's an opportunity to create a great experience for people, and not only for the people who visit, but for the town itself. So, we ended up with a plan. This was a 9-day project as opposed to just a weekend project, $15,000 budget. This was probably the most exciting 9 days of my career. It was fascinating where we didn't have a solid plan. We made it up as we went. Just the sheer creativity of working with all of these people over the course of 9 days was unbelievably exciting. It was largely a trades-driven project because the whole place had to be replumbed. It actually had raw sewage floating down the back of the toilets, so it was really in dire straits. And this is what began to emerge out the other end. Now, they're so proud of these toilets, they've created a postcard to sell to tourists. European fittings throughout, first-class fittings. Now, when I say we made it up as we went, one day somebody turned up with a boat and said, could you use a boat? Now, I'm not sure what they were thinking, but that boat led to that whole roof structure. And that's what I meant by it emerged as we went on. People would bring stuff, tradespeople would turn up, so things got modified as we went. $15,000. They sent me this as a Christmas present last Christmas, probably the best Christmas present I've ever got. This lookout up here was never used by tourists. Now there's a constant stream of tourists. And have you ever seen this many tourists studying a toilet block? And you'll notice that they put their name on here so that all of the people taking photographs would have the toilet name. Now, I must emphasise that all of this would not have happened unless local leadership emerged. This is the Grant Harnish, who runs the helicopter business empire here. He drove both that first project that I showed you and the toilet block. He is so passionate about placemaking in his town that he now only works 6 months a year. The other 6 months he devotes to making places in his town for free. Wow. Now, that's significant leadership growth. He just recently, I took him down to Palmerston North where he presented to business people there. And excuse the French, but he says, I just love building shit. And he says, I was one of those really selfish business people. I only ever thought about my business. His whole attitude to life has changed as a result of that. Now, that's what we need to emerge out of this kind of process that we're doing today is people who are willing to put their hand up and say, I'm going to provide some leadership, make stuff happen, and who knows where it's going to lead to. Now, They did have one. Well, they're doing projects all the time, but one project they desperately wanted to do was this car park. This car park alienated the town centre from their major asset, which was the Bay of Islands. You look at it from the air, this is the extent of the car park here. That first space that I showed you that they created was just here, so when you come off the jetty you go past. The toilet block is just up here, and here's the town centre. Now, this was, again, an entirely community-driven, community-funded. This project was $150,000, and a good portion of that was raised through the op shop. Whole companies donated days where they would bring in a whole work gang to work on it. Community got in, and each area of this project was driven by a separate driver. And here they are on their opening night. 1/3 of the town turned up to the opening of the park. This was all car park at one stage. Giant map board, map of the islands. Now each of the elements in this had their own little project group with a driver and people supporting that driver. $68 piano, separate project group looked after that. These seats. Now, incidentally, one of the secrets, just to divert for a moment, one of the secrets both in Porirua and all great public spaces is that people prefer to sit on things that don't actually look like a seat. It's human nature. They'll sit on steps, they'll sit on this kind of thing, long time before they'll sit on the kind of furniture that the council normally installs. In fact, one of the fascinating things, you remember those wave seats at the start in that first space? They were so popular that Grant wanted to put them throughout this park, and I said, no way, use some imagination, we're going to create some different seating. So it's the variety of seating which is part of the secret of this space. Little library. Now, this illustrates how creating kind of ambiguous spaces is far more powerful than over-designing. So these platforms around the tree get used for in all sorts of ways. They're incredibly flexible. You can tell how great a space is by the number of people who've got their feet up or their eyes closed. And you should have some photo opportunities. So where are the places that people take their photographs? Okay, you all hanging in there okay?
Yeah.
Sure. Maybe everybody stand up for a moment. Just stretch the legs. Okay, that's long enough. Sit down. Okay. Now, the first bit of work that we're going to get you to do in a moment is to look at the framework that we've constructed and the base plan and get some agreement on that before we move forward. So what I'm about to show you now is the framework that we developed for the canopies area. We actually did a framework for the entire town centre, okay, and I'm not presenting that entire framework here, but we've looked at the way that the whole town centre works. And we always start with some observations, because it's from the observations we can start to develop a strategy. So the first observation is that you actually have a great blank canvas. There's plenty of blank space, and there's plenty of volume. Okay, so we've got a great canvas to work with. Only problem is, it's in an intimidating scale. Okay, so obviously we're going to have to deal with that. It is also incredibly unwelcoming at the entrances. If you go to somebody's house and they've got their motorbikes parked at the back door and car parts all over the place at the back door, how welcome do you feel? So the entry, the welcome mat, is really, really important in setting the tone for what people are going to expect when they come inside. Every single entrance to the canopies is abysmal. Now, there's no car park there at the moment, but if there was a car park there, just imagine, you know, the whole entry is just clogged up with parked cars. And you've got, this is supposed to be your disabled access to your disabled car? Come on, you've got to be joking. And then there's just a plethora of signs and mishmash of stuff all clogging up the entry, so there's no kind of sense of entry into the space. And that doesn't matter where you're coming from. Remember earlier I said that the movement function dominates these kinds of spaces. Look, you even use road signs in under the canopies. Can I tell you, this is really important. 2% of what we do in a public space is what destroys the vitality of that public space. It is really the minute detail, like the entries, like these traffic signs, that create a particular kind of atmosphere and set the tone in the place. You've got to get that 2% right.
What was the speed limit set?
I don't know. It's a healthy food desert. I'm sorry, there may be some food retailers here, but we've got to call it as it is. And there is no healthy food outlets. I mean, Subway might argue with us with that because they've got some slogan about healthy, whatever. But, sorry?
You make what you can sell.
Yeah. Oh, I understand. There's a distinct lack of care in the space. In that there are bird drop-ins on things. Now, these rocks should be play equipment for kids. If I was a parent, there's no way I'd be letting my kids play on that. You with me? And that's throughout the space. It's not a social space. Now, I tell you a little story. This bakery here, look how much space we've got, and look where the bakery has put their 2 tables and chairs. Now, the first time ever that we...
That's what the Bible allows them to do.
Okay, I understand, but what I'm just pointing out what the current reality is, okay? And we're certainly going to deal with that. But I sat down, when I first arrived, I ordered something from the cafe and sat there, and I had a couple come up to me and say, "Can we borrow one of your chairs?" And I said, "Sure." And she said, no, I mean, can we sit at the table with you? You know, there are so few tables and chairs in this place that people have to beg somebody else, can they sit at the table with them? It really, I mean, you can see from the picture. Okay, so that were our observations, and this led on to our, what we call our strategies and our tactics. And so basically we have 4 strategies, and under those some tactics. The first is the market square. So that this, what we're looking at here is just the central area of the canopies, and you will see with the diagram in front of you, we've only done between 2 pillars right in the centre. So we're deliberately restricting the space to a very small space. But within that space, we're saying that you've already designated this area as the market quarters, so that this space should be treated as a market square is a concept for that particular space. The second strategy is to do with welcome, so on all of the entries to create a much more welcome entry to the space. Human scale, and this is going to be the big challenge, is about breaking the space up into more intimate units and more intimate spaces. So we'll show you in a moment with the concepts. We think there needs to be some false ceilings put into the space to create some variety and some more kind of intimate scale, but that the space be divided up into a smaller number of internal rooms, if you like. And then lastly, to activate that space with some linger nodes, so make the space work, and we're suggesting bringing in some healthy food, carts, etc., into making that a market space, but putting other linger nodes within there as well, so a mix of healthy food options and linger nodes. Okay, any questions about the strategies and the tactics that we're proposing?
Are we just focusing within that one particular space for the time being?
We're going to open that up for discussion in a moment, but that's what we're suggesting. Yeah. So I'm just outlining what we're suggesting at this point. So we've analysed the whole town centre, and there were some people say start down at the stream quarters, etc. There's a range of reasons we've said that the core central part of the canopies is the logical place to start. Okay? And we can debate that in a moment. Yep.
In the 5-year example,
yep.
You had a no planning process.
Yep.
How do you get around that with the present council bylaws and regulations?
Okay, it's a good question. First of all, it's not that we don't do any planning. You know, we've done some planning. But and remember, in that timeline we had work plan as one of the milestones that we have to reach, and that's where the council will sign off on what we intend to do. Now, what we're saying is within that, though, there's a great deal of flexibility. So if we, as we show you in a moment, we put down a grassed area. I'll go back one step. One of the things for a space like this is that I believe we should be keeping it incredibly flexible, and that we're on about trialling an approach to the space as opposed to doing a final design for it. So let me put this to you so that you kind of understand the concept. Has anybody in this room got their lounge room furniture nailed down to the floor or screwed to the floor? Now, this is a really obvious question, I know, but what is the reason we don't bolt our lounge room furniture to the floor?
The light changes summer and winter, and you want to put things in different places.
Okay, the light changes, so you want to move
and
the furniture.
Warmth as well, you know, the sun
yep.
comes
So
in.
different seasons. What's another reason you want the furniture loose?
Variation, so you can change the room around.
Okay. So I'm going to ask an obvious question. Why is it that we want to change our room? We get bored real easily. Now, one of the interesting, and under the old approach to planning, we would have to be forced today to come up with or in the next few weeks, come up with a plan for that space, and we'd concrete it all in place, and then in a year's time, we'd all be coming back to council going, we're bored with it, spend another $10 million rearranging the furniture. Let's tear it all apart and start planning again. So what cities like Fremantle have done under my guidance is that they've started using giant landscape pots that they can move with pallet jacks, putting out loose furniture, etc., so that they can experiment with how the space works. So it's a balance between doing planning but not over-planning. Now, in the case of the Porirua toilets, there was a base plan like I'm going to show you, where I said to them, you need to take out this piece of wall, this piece of wall, and this piece of wall to make these toilets work. And an overall kind of design philosophy. So there was some design. What I meant by we didn't have a finished design was we didn't design the garden on the roof, for example. We didn't design what colour it was going to be. We didn't design finishes. All of that stuff evolved. But we had to have an engineer check, if you take those walls out, what size beam do you need to put in? So there's a certain amount of design, but it's not being paralysed by that design and leaving enough room to be able to create stuff as you go. Okay, that's a good question.
I've got a lot of really creative ideas, so I'm looking forward to getting creative. But what do we do about STDs?
About what?
STDs.
What?
Safety, theft and damage. So, all these great ideas, I want to do some great things, but I'm worried that people might graffiti it, might damage it, might break it, might hurt themselves, might take it away. How do we, because it might always be done, but not always be people keep it up.
What a great question. Okay, strap yourself in. I'll tell you a story that will answer the question. When I first started working with Fremantle, I ran a workshop and the mayor was in the workshop. He walked out of the workshop and they were trying to revitalise a public square, King Square, right in the middle of Fremantle. One of the things they'd done was they'd put two outdoor table tennis tables in that space. Now, what can you imagine a council would be paranoid about with having table tennis tables in a public
Eye
space?
injuries.
Yeah, what else?
The balls.
Eh?
The ball's going missing.
The ball's going missing and the bat's going missing. So, being a very clever council, what they did was they're not going to let that stop them, so they deposited the bats and balls at a shop. And if you wanted to play table tennis, you went to the shop, you left them your ID, and you'd get the bats and balls, go and have a game, take the bats and balls back and get your ID back. Fair enough?
No.
Why not?
Well, I went there and no one could be bothered going to get it.
But the mayor also realised that the arrangement told a story. We do not trust the citizens of our town and we do not trust the visitors. Now, I want, as parents, and most of you have been parents, if not, you'll know what I mean. If you tell your child every single morning, you are untrustworthy, you are a thief and a robber, how does your child turn out? Are you with me? Now, we have a very clear choice here. So what the mayor did was he said, let's leave the bats and balls out 24/7 and just see what happens. And what they discovered was it cost them $20 a month to replace the bats and balls that went missing. And he said, that is the cheapest investment we ever made in bringing the square to life. In other words, we will invest $100,000 in a CCTV system that tells everybody that there are thieves and robbers and this is a dangerous place. Please get out of here as quickly as possible. I kid you not. But we wouldn't invest that $100,000 in stuff that could go missing. And here's the vicious cycle. If we don't trust, if we have to invest in building trust within the community. Otherwise you're on a vicious cycle where you distrust people and you actually produce that behaviour and it just goes into an absolute vicious cycle. Now the next thing that happened in Fremantle was I convinced them to put loose chairs out in the square. And they bought fold-up furniture because they brought it in every night. So I went back and I said, I want you to do an experiment, try leaving it out 24/7 and just see what happens. 2 months later they contacted me and said, unbelievable. It is cheaper to replace the furniture that goes missing than to pay the person that brought it in every night. Are you with me? So we have to be prepared to invest. Now they're very clever, so they put on all the furniture now has make yourself at home in King Square or something to that effect on it. So if anybody steals it, they know where it came from. But it doesn't say do not steal this property. So It is absolutely a key thing that we have to invest in trust. Now, one of the things that happened with the Pioneer toilets was those coloured change lights got vandalised very early in the piece when we were still building it. And one of the things I was very strong about was that, yes, we had to protect them, but we had to protect them in a way that didn't look like we were protecting them. Does that make sense? In other words, it's about being sensible. So some things you might just make heavy enough that they have to be moved with a pallet jack, or they're too bulky to put in the boot of the car. It's just a matter of being sensible if you're in those early stages of starting to build some trust. Okay. Let's move on quickly. This is the, and many of you have probably seen this, but now it will hopefully start to make some sense. So this is the space between the two columns that we're talking about right in the centre. This is the connection through to the stream side connection. So this is the entry that we're talking about creating. So at the moment this is all just parked cars, and we're saying take a couple of car parks out on either side here to be able to create this sense of entry, and long term this connection through to the stream side. The other thing is that we're suggesting a very simple technique to start to break the space up into a series of rooms just by using some AstroTurf to kind of carve out some separate rooms in the space. This is it from another angle. This is an example of what we're saying by building intimate, more human scale spaces in there. Now we don't literally take this. This is the only thing we could find in the modelling program that we could put in. But you get the idea. This could be suspended umbrellas. It could be a wool tapestry. It could be a series of market umbrellas. Whatever it is that starts to create another layer, a more intimate layer within the space. The chest set is what we would term a linger node. This shipping container that we put in here is an idea that we've taken from Federation Square in Melbourne, where they have a container that just has deck chairs, cushions, a whole variety of seating in it, and anybody can go and get whatever seat they like, and at night time all the seating goes back into the container. Just some different angles of how this might work and how it might look. You can see here like the deck chairs, etc., that could go into the shipping container at night, or whatever it happens to be. Could be just into the shops. The walkway through to the that would connect through to the stream side, so this kind of becomes a very logical connection. Again, there is so much space here that we're suggesting that we can carve out these little rooms in front of each of the shops, which gives another kind of intimate scale to it. As you can see there, there's still plenty of room even for two mobility scooters to...
Is this underneath the canopies?
Yeah. Sorry?
This is underneath the canopies?
Yeah.
Does it get...
So this is... this would be outside the pub.
So does the sun actually shine there?
No.
Yeah,
It's cold. Reasonable light.
Yeah.
A lot of the plants under the canopies are under the nail and you.
So what time of day does the sun actually land on it like that picture? Oh, that's
No.
No, it's probably because in the rendering program it didn't see the...
yeah. You're talking about deck chairs and
It's about creative.
It's a
Yeah.
This is a creative
Yeah.
process?
Can I say that what we do is somebody has got to put a piece of clay in the middle of the table, and you guys bash it into shape. And all we're doing is giving you a starting point. We're saying, here's a bunch of ideas, this is a structure for you to work with. And the key thing is we have to basically agree on the overall approach, which is those principles that I outlined, which is divide it up into a number of intimate spaces, put linger nodes in it. Now how you do that is up to you, but unless we're agreed on that first basis, then we'll all be going off in different directions. So we're just giving somewhere to start.
Now, does this become part of an overall plan, or is this just a plan for that area? I mean, or are you looking at the canopies area as a complete project, or just as a specific, let's do this 100 square metres?
Okay, good question. What we've done is we've created an overall framework for the canopies and for the connection down to the stream side. And what we're saying is that this is the place that you start. And if we had time, we would do a little exercise at this point. I just want you to imagine this, because this will show you the kind of process, and this is not the normal way that planning is done, okay?
So we've done that 3 times already.
Yeah.
That's why this is different. Yeah.
Okay, the way this is different is I would get you to do an exercise where you go around your table and every person can only say one word. But what you must do is construct a story. Now, we don't have time to do it, but some of you have probably played this game. Now, the fascinating thing is that within 3 minutes, you'll all be rolling in the aisles laughing. You'll have invented such a funny story. But if I put you around the group and I said, I want you to create a funny story as a group, you'd spend all day trying to create the funny story. So we often talk about our processes as a version of the one-word game. In other words, this is one word we're putting on the table. We're going to say that one word. We're going to see what happens when we get to the next word. But we're just going to trust that for this moment, the word we put on the table, something great's going to come out of it. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay, so this is it looking from above. So these are the 3 pillars here. This is the shop fronts here. This is the entry through to the stream side. I think this is the pub here, is it? Not sure. And I think this is the eyesight area. Again, this is just illustrative to kind of show you what the possibilities are, but you can see how we've basically divided it up into 4 separate room areas that are defined with the AstroTurf and created the entry here. In answer to the gentleman's question up the back, we always like to forecast what we think are maybe the next projects. So we've said dealing with all of the entries is a really important next step. The connection to the stream side is important, and the Market Lane, Selby Street. And really, we do this one first, and then as a group come back together and say, what is the next logical thing to do now that we've done this, based on the lessons that we've learnt out of doing it. So in Pi here, if you get ahead of yourself, you spend too much energy planning rather than actually doing. Okay, just a couple of quick inspirational photos just to get your creative juices running. These are parklets in San Francisco where retailers take away car parks and turn them into parks. This is New York, where they took back a whole lot of street space, just painted red dots on the ground and bought $10 chairs. So this is the kind of approach that we like to see, which is kind of temporary trial, just do it economically. They bought 300 chairs at $10.60 each and totally transformed the space. And you've already got a tradition that you can build on. I went down there. These are photographs from this morning, folks, of your canopies area. And it makes a huge difference when you've got those markets under there. And the Lions Club has already got a whole range of seats that they've built. Okay, so now we are starting work. So if at your table you can discuss... if at your table you can discuss, are you happy with starting at this spot? Is this the spot to start at? And are you happy with the overall guidelines that we've put up for you. Just just in your little group, discuss that, and then we'll have a report back.